The mysterious signal. Space stretched endlessly around Captain Ryland Pierce's small exploration ship, the Starblade. It was quiet, too quiet. The darkness of deep space was something he had grown used to, but tonight, something felt off. Then it happened. A distress signal flashed on his screen. Weak, broken, and old. Very old. NOVA. Analyze the signal, Ryland ordered, his voice calm but alert. His AI assistant, NOVA, responded instantly. Captain, this signal is over 10,000 years old. Ryland's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. Signals didn't last that long. They faded over time, lost in the endless void. But this one was still active, as if someone, or something, was still sending it. Then, through the crackling static, he heard it. A woman's voice. Weak. Desperate. Terrified. Please, someone. Save me. I don't belong here. Ryland froze. The voice was human. NOVA's cold, robotic voice broke the silence. Captain, the signal is coming from the abyss. Ryland felt a chill crawl down his spine. The abyss was a place no one returned from. A black hole-like void on the edge of known space. Ships that entered were never seen again. No one knew what was inside. No one was crazy enough to find out. But now, a human voice was calling for help. It could be a trap, NOVA warned. Ryland wasn't sure. If it was a trap, why send a distress signal this old? Who could survive in the abyss for 10,000 years? His instincts screamed at him to turn back. Ignore it. Forget it. But the voice. The fear in her voice. Something inside him wouldn't let it go. We're going in, he said firmly, gripping the controls. Captain, entering the abyss is suicide. NOVA protested. Ryland didn't listen. He fired up the engines, pushing the ship forward. As he neared the abyss, the stars around him started disappearing, one by one, swallowed by the unnatural blackness ahead. It wasn't just darkness. It was emptiness. His heart pounded. His hands clenched the controls tighter. Then, the ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. Something was pulling him in. Warning. Gravitational anomaly detected. NOVA shouted. Ryland fought the controls. Full reverse. Boost thrusters. The ship didn't respond. The abyss had caught him. And it wasn't letting go. The blackness ahead twisted and moved, like it was alive. Shapes shifted in the dark. Something was inside. Watching. Waiting. Ryland's breath caught in his throat. Then the woman's voice came again, louder this time. Help me. Please. They're coming. And then, silence. Ryland barely had time to react before the ship plunged forward. Swallowed by the abyss. Everything went black. Trapped in the void. Ryland's world was nothing but darkness. For a brief moment, he thought he was dead. The silence was complete, as if the universe itself had ceased to exist. No alarms, no AI voice, no sound of his own breathing. Then, pain. A sharp headache exploded behind his eyes as awareness rushed back to him. His fingers twitched, gripping the armrests of his pilot's seat. His body was stiff, cold sweat sticking to his uniform. He forced his eyes open and froze. The cockpit was dead. Every control panel flickered weakly, the once bright displays now dim like dying embers. The hum of the ship's engines, something he had always felt in his bones, was gone. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. NOVA. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. Nothing. Then, a whisper, a soft, distant sound, like someone breathing, barely audible in the heavy silence. His heart pounded. His instincts screamed danger. His hand went to his sidearm, but his fingers trembled as he unholstered it. He turned his head slowly. Through the dim emergency lighting, the cockpit window revealed something impossible. A structure. Floating in the darkness of the abyss, massive and ancient. made of obsidian-like metal, covered in glowing runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. It wasn't a natural formation. It was built. By whom? By what? Ryland swallowed hard. This was not what he expected. A sharp thump echoed through the ship. His breath hitched. He wasn't alone. Something was here. The whispering grew louder. And then she appeared. A ghostly figure flickered into existence in front of him. A woman. Her long silver hair floated around her like she was underwater. Her eyes, bright violet, glowing softly, were filled with something between desperation and warning. She wore strange, royal-looking armor, but it was cracked, damaged, like she had been in battle long ago. Her lips parted, and she whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Ryland's grip on his weapon tightened. "Who are you?" She blinked, as if the question confused her. Then she whispered, "They will come." The ship shook violently. Something massive was moving outside. Ryland's heart raced. He pushed himself up, ignoring the dizziness. He moved toward the control panel, trying to force a system reboot. "NOVA, restart emergency power," he barked. The AI's voice crackled back to life. Glitching. Power. Compromised. Unknown interference detected. Then something slammed into the ship. Hard. The impact sent Ryland flying backward, crashing into the wall. His vision blurred. Through the cockpit glass, he saw something move outside. A shadow. A giant, living shadow. It had no solid form, just shifting, writhing darkness. Its red eyes burned like molten stars, staring straight into his soul. The whispering turned into a scream inside his head. "Run!" the ghostly woman yelled. Ryland didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the weapons locker. The ship shook again, another impact sending cracks through the glass. "NOVA, activate shields." Shields offline. Hull integrity at 42%. Damn it. He grabbed his pulse rifle just as the cockpit window shattered. The air rushed out, pulling Ryland forward. But before he could be sucked into space, something pulled him back. The ghostly woman. She raised her hand, and suddenly, time froze. The rushing air stopped mid-motion. The glass shards hovered in place. Even the shadow creature outside seemed to pause. Ryland's mind screamed in confusion. What the hell was happening? The woman stepped closer, her glowing eyes meeting his. "I can hold them back for a moment, but you must move." "Move where?" He snapped, still trying to process everything. She turned her head slightly toward the ancient structure outside. "Inside. That is where the answers lie. That is where I am truly trapped." Ryland looked at the broken window, the abyss beyond, the massive, floating structure. He looked back at the woman. "Who are you?" he asked again. She gave him a sad smile. "I am the one you came to save, but I am also the reason you will never leave." And then, time resumed. The ship lurched, alarms blaring, the creature roaring outside. No more time to think. Ryland jumped. Out of the ship, into the abyss, straight toward the unknown. The lost princess. Ryland fell into darkness. For a split second, his body was weightless, drifting through the abyss with nothing but the void around him. His ship, the Starblade, was behind him, broken, surrounded by shadows, being consumed by the creatures lurking in the blackness. Then, gravity pulled him. Fast. The massive, floating structure in front of him yawned open, a metallic cavern swallowing him whole. He braced for impact, twisting his body midair, activating his emergency thrusters just in time. The sudden jolt nearly snapped his spine, but he managed to control his descent. He crashed hard onto a platform. Metal screeched under his boots. His arms burned from the landing, but he forced himself up. The place was huge. A massive cathedral-like hall, stretching endlessly into darkness. The walls were lined with strange glowing symbols, pulsing dimly like a dying heartbeat. Columns of black stone and gold metal rose high above, disappearing into the shadows above. And at the far end of the chamber, a cryopod. Ryland's breath caught in his throat. He knew what this was. A stasis chamber, a prison, or a tomb. The ghostly woman appeared again, flickering into existence beside him. Her violet eyes were filled with pain. "You came for me." Ryland took slow steps toward the pod, his boots echoing on the metal. He wiped the frost off the glass with his gloved hand. Inside, a woman. Not the hologram, not a ghost. A real woman. She was asleep, suspended in frozen time. Her face was peaceful, yet sad. Her armor, regal, ancient, golden with silver engravings, was cracked and battle-worn. And then, on her chestplate, he saw it. A royal insignia, one he had only seen in history books. He whispered the words without thinking. "The Celestial Empire." The ghostly woman nodded. "You remember?" Ryland turned to her. "No, that's impossible. The Celestial Empire was destroyed 10,000 years ago." The woman's gaze didn't waver. "Yet here I am." His mind raced. The Celestial Empire, the first true human civilization in space. A golden age that had ended in a war no one remembered. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything today. And then, they vanished. No records, no survivors. Gone. Until now. "Who is she?" Ryland demanded, pointing to the woman in the pod. The ghost hesitated. Then, softly, she whispered, "She is Princess Ilara, the last heir of the Celestial Empire." Ryland's stomach dropped. A lost princess, frozen for 10,000 years, in the heart of the abyss. It made no sense. Why? Why was she put here? The ghost turned her glowing eyes toward the darkness. To keep them from finding her. A cold realization washed over him. "The creatures," he murmured. "The void beasts. They weren't just hunting blindly. They were looking for her." Ryland clenched his fists. He wasn't the first to come here. Others had likely tried. None had succeeded. The abyss swallowed them all. But why her? Before he could ask, the chamber shook violently. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the structure. They had found him. The void beasts were coming. The ghost turned to him, her voice urgent. "You must wake her now." Ryland's hands flew over the ancient control panel, searching for a way to override the stasis. But the system was locked in a language he didn't understand. "Damn it," he cursed. The chamber rumbled again, this time closer. He felt them before he saw them. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The darkness at the edge of the room shifted, writhed, as if alive. And then, the first pair of glowing red eyes appeared. Then another, and another. Hundreds. They crawled from the walls, the ceiling, the shadows, moving like liquid darkness. Their limbs were twisted, shifting, never the same shape twice. One of them dropped down from above, landing on the floor with a wet, unnatural squelch. Its head snapped toward Ryland, its red eyes burning like dying stars. Ryland raised his rifle. The creature lunged. He fired. The pulse round ripped through the beast, its form dissolving into black mist. But more were coming. Too many. "Wake her up," the ghost screamed. Ryland's mind raced. The console wouldn't work. He had one option left. He pulled his knife from his belt and slammed it into the emergency override panel. A loud hiss filled the air. The cryo chamber unlocked. Inside, Ilara gasped as her eyes snapped open. For the first time in 10,000 years, she was awake. Her gaze met Ryland's. And then she whispered, barely above a breath, "They found me." The creatures screeched. The chamber collapsed into chaos. Ryland grabbed Ilara's hand and ran. And behind them, the abyss itself came to life. Escape from the abyss. Ryland's grip tightened around Princess Ilara's wrist as they ran. The void creatures screamed behind them, inhuman, hollow cries, filled with hunger and rage. The massive ancient chamber shook, dust and debris raining from above. The abyss itself was waking up. Ilara stumbled, her body still weak from 10,000 years of stasis. Rylan didn't let go. "Move, damn it," he shouted, pulling her forward. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to run. Her armor was heavy, her mind foggy, but her instincts kicked in. She had been a warrior once, a princess of the Celestial Empire. And now she was running for her life. Behind them, the creatures spilled into the chamber, crawling from the walls, the ceiling, the very shadows. Their twisted limbs snapped and stretched unnaturally, their glowing red eyes locked onto her. She knew why. They had waited for her to wake up. She was their prize. Rylan led her down a long metallic corridor, his pulse rifle firing blue streaks of plasma at anything that moved. The creatures twisted and howled, some disintegrating under his shots, others absorbing the damage and reforming. "Damn it, they're not dying," Rylan growled. Ilara's breathing was ragged, her mind still trying to process everything. The last thing she remembered was war, betrayal, a desperate plan. Then, darkness. And now, a stranger was dragging her through a nightmare. She needed answers. But first, they had to survive. There, Rylan pointed ahead. A massive door stood at the end of the corridor, ancient and covered in glowing golden symbols. It looked like a way out. But the ghostly woman appeared beside them, her expression grave. "No, you must not open that door." Rylan skidded to a stop. "What? Why?" Ilara stared at the ghostly figure, her own face, her own reflection, from another time. She understood now. The ghost was her, a fragment of her past, a memory or something more. "We don't have time for this," Rylan barked, aiming his rifle at the door controls. "That door leads deeper into the abyss," the ghost warned, her voice like an echo through time. "If you go in, there is no escape. Then where the hell do we go?" Ilara's eyes flashed with recognition. She had built this place, this prison. "Follow me," she commanded. For the first time, Rylan hesitated. She had just woken up. Could she even be trusted? But there was no time to argue. The creatures were coming. He followed her. The core chamber. They raced down another corridor, this one older, more ancient. The walls were covered in Celestial Empire symbols, flickering weakly. "Where are we going?" Rylan demanded. "To the core," Ilara answered. "The only thing keeping this place from collapsing into oblivion." Rylan frowned. What the hell is the core? A weapon. Before he could press her further, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. Rylan's breath caught. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. A vast circular hall stretched before them, a floating sphere of pure energy pulsing at its center. Metallic runes hovered in midair, orbiting the core like planets around a star. The whole place felt alive. But something was wrong. The core was weakening, flickering. Ilara's eyes darkened. "It's failing." She stepped forward, placing a hand on a control panel. The holographic interface appeared in front of her, ancient symbols cascading down like falling stars. Rylan didn't understand a damn thing, but he understood the urgency in her voice. "The seal is breaking," she said. Rylan glanced over his shoulder. The creatures had stopped at the entrance of the chamber, their bodies writhing, hesitant. They weren't attacking. "Why did they stop?" he asked. Ilara's fingers froze over the controls. "Because they've already won," she whispered. Rylan turned back to the core and saw the truth. The energy wasn't just failing, it was leaking. A crack ran through its center, pulsing with dark energy. And from that crack, something was emerging. A shape, a figure, not like the others. This one was different, older, greater. The air turned to ice. The shadows deepened. A voice, low, rumbling, ancient, whispered in the air. "Ilara, I have waited for you." Ilara went pale. Ryland's blood ran cold. This wasn't just another void creature. This was their master, the one that had been locked away for 10,000 years. And now, because they had woken her up, it was free. Escape or die. Run. Ilara grabbed Ryland's arm and pulled him backward. The core cracked further, releasing a shockwave of energy that sent both of them flying across the chamber. The void creatures howled in triumph, their master's presence empowering them. Ryland coughed, his vision swimming. How the hell do we stop this? Ilara's eyes burned with determination. We don't, she said. We run. She slammed her hand against another control panel, and a hidden door opened at the side of the chamber, a narrow escape tunnel. Ryland didn't ask questions. He grabbed his rifle, pulled her up, and they sprinted for their lives. Behind them, the chamber collapsed into chaos. The core shattered, releasing a pulse of dark energy that consumed everything in its path. The master of the abyss laughed, its voice echoing through the collapsing ruins. Run, little humans, run while you still can. Ryland and Ilara dived through the exit just as the world behind them erupted into black fire. The truth about Ilara. The tunnel shook as Ryland and Ilara sprinted forward, dodging falling debris. Behind them, the core chamber imploded in a storm of black fire and void energy, consuming everything. The shadows writhed, the creatures howled, and the abyss itself screamed. And amidst it all, the master of the abyss whispered in a voice as old as the universe itself. You cannot run from me, child of the Empire. You are mine. Ryland's lungs burned as he ran. His body ached from the impacts, from the fight, from the sheer exhaustion of this impossible mission. But he couldn't stop. Not now. He glanced at Ilara, the woman who had been frozen for 10,000 years, the last princess of an empire long forgotten. Her face was set in grim determination, but there was something else in her eyes. Fear. Almost there, she shouted over the deafening chaos. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a massive hangar. Rusted ships, ancient celestial empire warships, lay in eerie silence. Dust and frost from the ages coated them, but some of them still had power. Can any of these things fly? Ryland yelled. Ilara didn't answer. She ran to a control panel, placing her hand on the interface. Golden symbols flickered to life. The hangar rumbled. One of the ships, a sleek, dagger-shaped cruiser with celestial empire markings, lit up with a deep, pulsing blue glow. The engine hummed, struggling, waking up from a slumber older than humanity's recorded history. But behind them, the tunnel collapsed. The void creatures poured in like a tidal wave of living darkness. And within them, he stepped through. The master of the abyss. Ryland's pulse pounded in his ears. He was tall, his form ever shifting. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes a twisted beast, sometimes a living shadow with burning eyes. But his voice remained the same. Cold, ancient, absolute. You cannot leave. She belongs to me. Ilara spun around, and Ryland saw something flash in her eyes. Recognition. She knew him. Not just the creatures. The master himself. Go, she ordered, rushing toward the ship. Ryland didn't hesitate. He covered her, firing his pulse rifle at the creatures, each shot tearing through the writhing masses. But it wasn't enough. There were too many. The master of the abyss extended his hand, and suddenly, Ryland's body froze. Not physically, not telekinetically. Something inside him locked in place, like his very existence had been seized. The master's gaze burned into him. You do not belong here, human. But she does. Ryland gritted his teeth, fighting whatever force was holding him in place. He saw Ilara reach the ship's cockpit. Activating its systems, the ancient vessel rumbled to life, its engines flaring, the shields booting up. The master turned to her. You are my key. Ilara's face twisted with rage and grief. You destroyed my people. You turned them into this. The master tilted his head. Your people did this to themselves. Ryland's mind reeled. What the hell was he talking about? Ilara lifted her hand, and to Ryland's shock, the golden symbols around the hangar responded. They obeyed her. The ship's weapons powered up. Not today, monster. And she fired. A massive beam of pure energy erupted from the ship's cannons, engulfing the master of the abyss in golden flames. The creatures screamed as their leader was struck, not just with raw energy, but with something deeper, something that could actually hurt him. The force holding Ryland broke. He staggered, his body free again. Move, Ilara roared. Ryland ran for the ship, leaping into the open ramp just as the creatures swarmed toward them. The moment he was inside, Ilara punched the controls. The hangar doors groaned, ancient locks disengaging. The ship launched into the void. The abyss roared in fury. They were free. Or so Ryland thought. The betrayal. For a few minutes, they flew in silence, the ship's old yet majestic design cutting through the endless dark. Ryland collapsed into a chair, panting. We made it. Ilara didn't answer. Her hands trembled on the controls. Her violet eyes were locked on the ship's display, at the coordinates they were approaching. Ilara, what's wrong? Ryland asked. She turned to him, her face pale. They already knew we were coming. Before Ryland could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared. And outside, a fleet, a massive human fleet was waiting for them. Not from the past, not from the Celestial Empire. This was modern. This was from Ryland's time. A transmission crackled through the ship's speakers. Princess Ilara of the Celestial Empire, by order of Admiral Krex, you are to stand down immediately. Ilara's face turned to pure fury. Ryland clenched his fists. Krex. You know him. She swallowed hard. Not him, but his kind. Outside, the fleet's warships moved into formation, their weapons locked onto them. What the hell is going on? Ryland demanded. Ilara slowly looked at him. I was never meant to be saved, Ryland. His blood ran cold. I was meant to stay locked away. The truth hit him like a bullet. This wasn't just about an old empire. This wasn't just about the abyss. This was a secret someone wanted buried. And now, they were both in the crosshairs. The fleet's weapons began charging. And just like that, Ryland realized their escape had only led them into another trap. Betrayal and the final stand. The air inside the ship was tense, thick with an unspoken dread. Ryland stared out the cockpit window at the massive human fleet waiting for them. Warships bristling with plasma cannons and railguns, forming a blockade, surrounding them like predators closing in on their prey. This wasn't a rescue operation. This was an execution. The transmission crackled again. Princess Ilara of the Celestial Empire, shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Do not resist. This is your only warning. Ilara's hands clenched into fists. Her violet eyes burned with fury. Ryland turned to her, his voice tight. Ilara, what the hell is going on? Why does a human fleet want you dead? She exhaled, shaking her head. Because I know the truth. Before he could ask what truth, the voice on the transmission changed. A new figure appeared on the comms, a man with cold steel gray eyes, sharp cheekbones, and a military uniform decorated with more medals than Ryland had ever seen. Admiral Krex. You've been asleep for a long time, Princess, he said, his voice dripping with authority. I suggest you surrender. We can end this quickly. Painlessly. Ilara laughed bitterly. Painlessly. Just like you erased my entire empire. Krex tilted his head slightly. That was a long time ago. Things have evolved. We have no need for the Celestial Empire anymore. Ryland felt his gut twist. This wasn't just about capturing a fugitive from the past. This was about erasing history. Ilara turned to him. We can't let them take me. If they do, it's over. Everything. Then tell me the truth, Ryland demanded. She took a deep breath. And then she told him everything. The dark secret of the Celestial Empire. The war that destroyed my empire wasn't a war against aliens. It was a war against humans. Ryland felt a chill crawl down his spine. Ilara continued, her voice cold. The Celestial Empire was the peak of human civilization. We built wonders, ruled the stars, and expanded further than any species before us. But the deeper we went, the more we discovered. Something else was already here. Ryland didn't need her to clarify. He already knew. The void beasts. They were never just mindless creatures. Her voice trembled. They were unfinished. Ryland frowned. Unfinished. They were experiments. His heart skipped a beat. Ilara turned, her face filled with old pain. The Celestial Empire didn't discover the void beasts. We created them. Silence. A dead, suffocating silence. The Empire was obsessed with perfection, strength, immortality. We engineered super soldiers, beings who could survive anything, exist anywhere. But we went too far. We didn't create warriors. We created monsters. She swallowed hard. And when we lost control, when they turned on us, we did the only thing we could. We sealed them away. We locked them inside the abyss. And we used me as the key. Ryland's mind reeled. The abyss wasn't just a natural death trap. It wasn't some cursed region of space. It was a prison. A prison for something humanity had created. And Ilara had been its warden. That's why they trapped me, Ryland. Not because they wanted to save me, but because I was the only one who could open the abyss again. Ryland finally understood. That's why Krex wanted her dead. If the truth got out, if the galaxy found out what humanity had done, everything would change. And Krex would rather destroy her than let that happen. The battle begins. The ship shook violently as a warning shot slammed into its shields. Krex's voice echoed through the comms. I will not ask again. Surrender now, or you will be annihilated. Ilara looked at Ryland. We fight. Ryland shook his head. Are you insane? There's a whole damn fleet out there. Her lips curled into a smirk. Then let's see if they remember why they were afraid of the Celestial Empire. She slammed her hand against the control panel. The ship changed. The lights brightened, the engines roared, and the ancient runes on the ship's hull began to glow. The entire vessel shifted, transforming from an old relic into a war machine awakening from slumber. This wasn't just a cruiser. It was a battleship from an era of gods. Hold on, Ryland. This is going to be messy. She punched the thrusters. The ship launched forward at impossible speed, tearing straight toward the enemy fleet. Admiral Krex barely had time to react. All ships, open fire. The sky erupted in plasma and missiles. But Ilara's ship moved like no human vessel ever could. It twisted, spun, dodging between death and fire, its ancient shields deflecting energy blasts like swatting away insects. Ryland grabbed the weapons console, his hands flying over the controls. You better hope this thing still has teeth. Ilara smirked. Oh, it does. She activated the main cannon. A deep, resonating hum filled the ship as energy charge, an ancient weapon that had been asleep for 10,000 years. The enemy fleet panicked. Krex's eyes widened. Destroy them now. But it was too late. Ilara fired. A golden wave of energy burst from the ship, cutting through the darkness. Not like an explosion, but like a blade slicing through reality itself. The first warship it touched simply ceased to exist. Then another. Then another. The fleet crumbled in an instant, their technology centuries too primitive to withstand the wrath of the Celestial Empire. For the first time, the hunters became the hunted. And Admiral Krex. His voice crackled through the comms, filled with shock and rage. You fools. You don't understand what you've done. And then he fled. His flagship vanished into hyperspace, retreating into the void. Rylan let out a shaky breath. Holy shit. Elara smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That felt good. But Rylan wasn't celebrating, because he knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Krex was still out there. And the abyss. It wasn't done with them yet. Humanity's last hope. The wreckage of the destroyed fleet floated in silence, burning fragments of once powerful warships drifting through the abyss of space. The echoes of the battle had faded, leaving only the distant hum of Ilara's ship, the last relic of the Celestial Empire. Victorious but battle-worn. Rylan sat in the co-pilot's chair, his breathing still uneven. His hands shook as he stared at the glowing symbols running across the ship's control panels. Ancient human technology, beyond anything his time had ever known. And it had just annihilated an entire fleet. Across from him, Elara stood at the command console, her violet eyes scanning the damage reports. Despite the exhaustion written on her face, there was something unbreakable about her, something that belonged to an era of warriors who had ruled the stars. She turned to Rylan. Krex got away. Rylan exhaled, rubbing his temples. Yeah, and that means he's bringing back an even bigger force. Elara didn't argue. She knew it was true. Krex hadn't just run to save himself. He had run because he knew something worse was coming. Something neither of them could stop. The abyss was stirring. And it wasn't finished with them yet. The abyss awakens. A tremor shook the ship. Not from outside. From space itself. Rylan looked at Elara. Tell me you felt that. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The lights on the control panels flickered, ancient symbols warping, twisting as if something was interfering with the ship's very existence. Then, a voice whispered through the void. You have failed. Rylan's stomach dropped. He recognized it instantly. The master of the abyss. The very thing that had been locked away for 10,000 years. The entity that had been waiting for Elara to awaken. Ilara's face darkened. She turned to the main viewport, toward the abyss. And then she saw it. A rift was opening in space. A massive gaping wound in reality itself, black tendrils of living darkness spreading outward like veins across the stars. The gravity around it warped, and the wreckage of destroyed ships was pulled in, consumed. And from within the rift, they emerge. Not just the void beasts. Not just the shadows. Something far worse. The ancient ones. The first creations. Ilara's breath caught. No. Rylan's pulse pounded. What the hell are those? Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. The ones who never died. The ones who changed. The creatures were massive, their forms shifting between reality and nightmare. Some had limbs like ships, stretching across the void like crawling titans. Others had faces of stone and fire, burning with the memories of an age long gone. And at their center, standing tall in the void, was the master of the abyss. His form was no longer just shadows. He was rising, becoming something more, becoming unstoppable. And then he spoke. You tried to lock us away, princess, but we were never your prisoners. His molten eyes burned into her. We were your gods. Elara gritted her teeth. You're not gods. You're mistakes. The master of the abyss laughed, the sound shaking the very fabric of space. Then let me correct the errors of the past. The void rushed toward them, tendrils of abyssal energy lunging for the ship. And Elara did the only thing she could. She pushed the ship into hyperspace. The last stand. They burst out of hyperspace above a planet Rylan had never seen before. A dying world. The skies were red, the land cracked and broken, oceans reduced to mere scars of what they once were. Elara's hands flew over the controls. We don't have much time. I can make one final stand here, but you. Rylan cut her off. I'm not leaving. She looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. But there was no time for argument. The abyss was coming. The Master and his creatures tore through hyperspace, ripping through reality itself, arriving in orbit around the planet. A final battleground. Ryland clenched his fists. What's the plan? Ilara's eyes glowed with the fire of 1,000 years. We end this. The ship transformed, shifting into its true form, an ancient war machine, one that had once led the Celestial Empire into battle against the unknown. The weapons charge, glowing with golden light, a relic of a lost age. And the void came for them. The final battle. The war was unlike anything Ryland had ever seen. Ilara's ship moved like a living thing, twisting between monstrous entities, firing beams of golden energy that tore through the darkness. But the Master of the Abyss was relentless. The sky burned, space twisted, and the very fabric of reality warped under the sheer scale of the battle. Ilara poured everything she had into the fight. She unleashed the last weapon of the Celestial Empire, a dimensional rupture, an energy pulse designed not to destroy, but to erase. To remove something from existence itself. She fired it, and the Master of the Abyss screamed. His form cracked, shadows peeling away. The creatures wailed, their bodies turning into mist, their very essence erased from the universe. The abyss collapsed inward, a chain reaction started by the final shot of an empire long gone. And as the last echoes of the Master faded, it was over. The abyss was gone. The creatures were gone. The battle won. Aftermath. The silence that followed was deafening. The stars were still. The war was over. Ryland exhaled shakily, slumping back into his seat. We actually did it. Ilara didn't respond immediately. She was staring out at the void, at the place where the abyss had once been. She turned to him. For now. Ryland frowned. What do you mean for now? Her violet eyes darkened. Krex is still out there. And the truth about the abyss, about what humanity created, it won't stay buried forever. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. So what now? Ilara smirked, the fire of a warrior still burning in her eyes. Now we hunt. And as their ship turned toward the stars, toward the future, humanity's last hope became its greatest legend. The lost princess and the last explorer, and their fight was only just beginning.